to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Travis Lester, Lulu Randolph.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
This is a Immanuel Nashville takeover. It's one of the benefits of having your own podcast. You can do whatever you want. So, yeah, this is great. Travis, you are one of my closest and most respected friends. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for having me on.
And Lulu. So we've been going to the same church for some time, but I don't know you that well, actually.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm really looking forward to getting to know you better through the conversation here.
Same.
But yes, shout out for Immanuel Nashville, since that's where we're all from here. ImmanuelNashville.com. Pastor TJ Timms, Scott Thomas, John Farmer, Sam Albury. I get them all? Yeah, I think that's it.
That's right.
Lulu, I'd actually like to hear a little bit more about your story and where you're from and the whole. By the way, when did you guys start coming to Immanuel?
I think we started coming maybe back in 2015. There were two things. We'd been in Nashville, Jake and I, since about 2008 for him, 2009 for me.
Okay.
And so we were at another church for a while, and then we actually started visiting Immanuel in 2015 when some friends of ours who went to Immanuel invited us, because I think it was post the Charleston church shooting and Defense of Marriage Act ruling that a couple of things were happening, and we weren't sure how to feel about a couple of different things because of what was going on at our church. And so our friends invited us to Immanuel. Ray Ortland was preaching. He was on fire. He messed us up that day in a great way, but we were like, okay, maybe we'll come back here.
Yeah. Yeah. We started attending in late 2016, like right at the end of the 2016. It was when Jericho was born. So I actually attended for like 3 or 4 weekends, I think, before Mariana started coming because she was home with Jericho. So end of 2016, 2015 or 16, but I don't know you and Jake extremely well. So I'd love to get to know you just a little bit. I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah. I'll give a big picture, and then I guess whatever we get into possibly can go from there. But I am the oldest of 3, I guess. My parents are Nigerians, and I was born here in the United States. My brothers and I were.
Do you have dual citizenship?
We do, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
All
the siblings?
Yes. And my parents live there now. They went back to Nigeria after about 30-something years. And so they're living and working there. And most of my family is back there. Most of their siblings are still there. In a couple of other parts of the world. But yeah, I grew up Nigerian American, very much so. And so I think when it comes to just figuring out a sense of place and things like that in the U.S., that was like an interesting and kind of challenging at sometimes upbringing for me, because I was very aware of me being African, and especially most of my life I lived in Savannah, Georgia, which is beautiful. I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but also just racially in like the 90s, 2000s was like just a really not very diverse place, at least in the schools, in the parts of town that we lived in and where we went to. And
were you in school when you were in Savannah?
Yes, I started elementary school there, I think at least first grade, and then went to a private school in 5th grade, and things got harder from there, kind of racially. But I think I grew up very aware that and we would go back to Nigeria at different points because, again, that's still home for us, even though my brothers and I weren't born there. And so it was interesting because when I was in Savannah, in the schools that I went to, I was maybe one of 2. When I graduated, I was the only Black person in my grade. And so within the school, I was like maybe there were probably a handful of us between kindergarten and 12th grade. And so I was clearly like the Black person, whatever that meant, all of the baggage that came with that and the questions and the weird interactions. And then I know at one point my mom, she's like, you guys need to be around other people of color. And so she sent us to like an inner city camp, which did not go well because then people were like, you're very weird Black people. They're like, why do you talk like that?
You're still in Savannah at this point?
Yes, exactly. Okay. And they're like, there's a couple different things that we just didn't know. I learned how to double dutch that summer. I was very proud of myself. I learned a little bit how to braid too, because I grew up with brothers. And I never had to take care of my own hair. And so
now excuse my ignorance. What is double dutch?
Oh, it's a super fun jump rope game. Like it's with 2 jump
I thought
ropes.
It had to do. Okay,
it's a very rhythmic, and just a lot of fun. But I didn't know what it was when I went there at the beginning of summer camp, and so that was one of the things I was like, I have to fit in. Like, I have to fit in and I have to learn this. And it was also just a lot of fun. So that's like my brothers fit in automatically because boys, I think y'all are gentler to each other. And basketball,
we're rougher. We're rougher physically and gentler emotionally, wouldn't you say, Travis?
I think that's about right.
For the most part.
Yes.
Yeah. And then like at that space, there were times where I was not black enough. At school, I was definitely not white. And then when we went back to Nigeria, they're like, oh, our American cousins, especially since I don't speak, my family's tribe is Igbo, and I'm not fluent in Igbo. And so that kind of thing, like I felt like outside in a lot of different ways from whatever space I was in. But I think I grew up learning how to navigate that. And that's really informed my sense of self, like racially and ethnically, sense of self too, when it comes to how, I feel like the Lord's been strategic in that, even though I always felt like a puzzle piece or a weird chameleon. That was just like not always there, but I think the Lord has used that and has really done so in ways that have strengthened my faith and strengthened to my just my journey. Like I went to graduate school and got a PhD in community research and action, and my research was on ethnic identity development and how that influences how people see themselves and the challenges and opportunities in the world and how they navigate that. And so like there's tons of experiences from childhood and onward that led me to that kind of area of study, but also that with my faith is like being a Christian and an academic and how to reconcile those two, which just felt like a couple of different things. And so I feel like that's a kind of like throwing it all at the wall overview.
Yeah. And then where and how did you meet Jake then?
Jake and I met in college.
Okay.
Yeah, he was actually.
And where'd you go to college then?
We both went to Oxford College of Emory University. So it's like a 2-year school that fed into Emory. And Jake was actually at Xavier University in New Orleans.
Okay.
But Hurricane Katrina hit, and then all those students in those schools kind of like went. A lot of schools were just accepting students who had been displaced by the hurricane, and so Jake ended up coming to Emory, and then we met, and then we're friends, and then ended up dating as he was leaving and as I was going into my senior year.
Okay. And then what brought you guys to Nashville?
Both of us for graduate school. So Jake was studying microbiology at Vanderbilt, and I was studying community research and action for my doctoral program.
Okay.
So,
At Vandy?
Right, yeah. Both of us came here for that, and we planned to go back. Stayed. But yeah, we just ended up staying in Nashville.
Yay for Vandy. I think that happens a lot.
Yeah.
People come here for school and then just wind up staying, which is great.
Yeah.
So I think it's you and I, last man standing without PhDs in the room, it sounds like.
That would be true. And it'll probably remain that way.
It'll definitely remain that way for me. I'm working off of a high school diploma. That's all I've got. There's quite a stretch between me and a PhD for sure. What line of work are you in now then?
I'm a researcher, so I'm actually, funny enough, a postdoc back at Vandy. I was teaching after I graduated at Fisk for a little bit, but then a research position opened up in Vanderbilt's sociology department, and so I'm over there now.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. Travis, I know your story a little bit, but I'm sure people would be interested. You want to kind of give us a brief flyover of your upbringing and how you guys wound up in Nashville and everything?
No, absolutely. So I'm from Georgia, just a little bit north of...
Go Bulldogs, right?
Go Bulldogs. Right? So there you go.
I'm just saying that for your sake, not because I'm a Bulldogs fan, to be clear.
Yes, I grew up in a small town, Athens, Georgia, home of the University of Georgia. I have one sister, grew up in both my parents, just loving, caring Christian family. And I think, first, Athens, Georgia is a very, I would say, poor area outside of the University of Georgia. Right? The poverty rate is in the 30s%.
Wow,
which is definitely higher than most towns in Georgia and cities in Georgia. Mm-hmm. And so, what I wanted to do, I wanted to get out of Athens upon graduation of high school. And so, my journey, I would say, to Nashville looked like first going to a historically black college and university in Atlanta, Clark Atlanta University. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to be around other successful black people. Mm-hmm. Just from my upbringing, I didn't initially see that a whole lot. So I was encouraged by making that move there, just being a part of African American community, diverse African American community in Atlanta. at that university really shaped kind of my worldview, I would say, today. And so I studied business administration, and so I always wanted to be in business. Didn't have a passion for a certain industry or whatever, but I did have a passion for business, and organization and so forth. And so I did that. So when out of college, I've worked within the consumer packaged good industry, and worked for multiple companies over the past, call it, nearly 15 years in sales primarily across the country. And so my family, and I have a big family. I have four kids, and I've lived in, I guess Tennessee will be my fourth state. So
Okay.
North Carolina, Arkansas, and now here. And so
Yeah.
great experience professionally, moving in different places, really allowed us to be able to adapt into a lot of different situations and a lot of cultures and a lot of different communities. We landed in Nashville because we wanted to be closer to Georgia. And so we got a great opportunity to work here in the Nashville area. And we thought it would be a great adventure for our family. And so we live in Franklin now. And so we've been there, I guess, about 3.5 years now. And so it's been a pretty good experience so far.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you're here.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'd know you if you hadn't wound up here. How did you guys wind up at Immanuel again? Was it through Cornerstone in Knoxville?
Yeah. So we have some mutual friends who had attended Immanuel or knew of Immanuel and recommended that we check it out. And so, like most new people who are looking for churches in Nashville area, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
There's a church on every corner, if you will. And so we didn't want to really just church hop for long periods of time. And so I think we maybe attended 3 churches. And so it was the holiday time, like Thanksgiving, Christmas time, when we first went to Immanuel. And I didn't want to just try churches throughout that time. It's like, let's just choose one. Happened to be Immanuel, and we never left.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you're there for sure.
Yeah.
Historically black college or university. You glad you did that? Is it which one did you go to again? You said it was Atlanta area?
Clark Atlanta University.
Okay.
Yes.
And what were you looking for specifically out of going to a school like that?
I think I was looking for home. A sense of home as relates to this culture, because within the African American community, there's a lot of different cultures, I would say, within that. And so, one of the things I gained a lot of perspective of those that are from California versus those that are from Chicago versus New York City versus the South. Although your skin might look the same, totally different. Totally different people, totally different upbringing, totally different perspective on life in general. And so you kind of get that, you get that education as well when you attend a predominantly black university. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to hear from you guys. I'd like to. I mean, this could be such. I mean, this could be such a long conversation. Like, we're going to barely even scratch the surface here. Last week we had Anthony Hendricks on talking about ethnic unity. That was fantastic. By the time this comes out, Brad Perry is going to come. Would be live. He was on last week too. So I mean, we could take this a lot of different directions. I'd love to hear, and I'm happy taking it whatever direction you guys are, think best, and however you think you kind of best contribute to the conversation here. But I would love to hear from you guys' perspective, like what is broken, because being white in America, we don't pick up on these things quickly or keenly, and we can tend to think, things are great, things are fine. Like, it's 2020 in the United States of America, things are pretty good. We have things figured out pretty well. You know what I mean? Like, We are attempting to put people on Mars. We've put people on the moon. You know, like we have done some pretty incredible things here, and yet we're still dealing with some of this stuff. There's no, I mean, that can't really be. We're past the point of arguing about whether this is still an issue or not. It's an issue, but I don't think us white people we're oblivious to a lot of it. I believe. So where do you see is like, where's the brokenness now? Where's the disconnect? I mean, it kind of struck me, Travis, when you said you were looking for home, like, and it strikes me as sad a little bit that like you wouldn't find just any university or college home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you want to jump in, Lulu? Like, how have you experienced brokenness here in this area of ethnic unity?
I feel like my mind is racing as far as different places to start. I think if I'm making sure that I, for me personally, approach this from the right perspective, I think it starts back in Scripture, right? And we learn in Genesis that, you know, in the beginning, God created them, male and female. He created them, right? And I think that if anything, that's really one of the few, if any, distinctions that God made between like persons, but even still, all of them were made in the image of God, Adam and Eve, and the people who came as a result of them. And so there's a place in Scripture where we have people, and there's, you know, male here, female, and it's not necessarily like one over the other. They're side by side different, but both equal value in the eyes of God. And then, you know, we look and see later on where people, where, you know, throughout Genesis, then the earth becomes populated, and we have the Tower of Babel and like the dispersion of languages, and from that cultures to emerge from kind of those distinctions. I think somewhere along the way, and Scripture later on kind of goes into detail to talk about this, but I think we take the difference that was side by side and we started to flip it. And we made those differences horizontal. And whether it became like about men and women, whether it became about, you know, this family or that family, or people, when it comes to the colors of skin, Scripture doesn't specifically talk about when that emerges and when that becomes a thing, but we know from our lived experiences that that's absolutely a thing. That there are differences in the amount of melanin that we have in our bodies that then is visually seen. And for some reason, somewhere along the way, someone said, and it typically is, and I know it sounds bold, but I'm going to say it, across the world, typically darker is worse, and lighter is more valued. And that's for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes historical, and that get mixed in with culture in those kind of different ways. But I think the brokenness began when we started to question whether it's explicitly or implicitly what God said about equality, and started to try and build our own understandings of the world, our own, essentially our own theologies, right? And this is an anecdote, but I know for me, when I was in first grade, again, back in Savannah, and I was going to a public school at this point, but I had a friend, a couple different friends, but I was playing with a friend. She was Asian, and a white friend as well. The three of us were playing something, and, you know, randomly kids were talking, and she's just kind of like, you know, my grandma told me that when God created the world, he, when he was making people, he was making them kind of like a batch of cookies, right? And so he put the first people in, and they came out burnt, and those were black people. And then God's like, let me try again. So he put the cookies back in, they came out underdone, and those were white people. And so he put the cookies in a third time, they came out perfectly, and those were Asian people.
Wait, one second. Who said this?
This is my friend, my first grade friend. Again, randomly. Kids talk about stuff super randomly.
The kid is telling you that her grandma told her
this, and so she was sharing it with us.
But it was an Asian kid. Okay. So the Asian, of course, is like the one that's perfect.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and
ouch.
Exactly. And so with me, at least when I was thinking that, I remember just thinking like, okay, well, you can still do stuff with cookie dough. I mean, like, you can put it back in, you can put it in ice cream, take your chances, eat it raw. But like, if it's burnt, like, nobody wants that. You just throw away burnt cookies.
Yeah.
And even though nobody pointed to me and said that this is a verse of scripture. Like that way of seeing the world, there's a theology there that showed up that I didn't even know what to do with as a kid, pretty early. There's these views of the world, whether they're explicitly stated like that, or whether they're in the images that we see, or the books that we read, or even in just kind of like the conversation that we have that permeate these ideas about who's better, who's worse, whatever the things. And of course, we all tend to contend, depending on what groups we fall into, cases for why our group or class is the best or the ideal or whatnot. And that's brokenness. That's a false theology. It's ethnocentrism that shows up there in this, again, silly cookie example, but it's no different from ethnocentrism that says, okay, well, we need like authority. People in positions of authority need to look a certain way. So whether that means that we need a white male, or whether that means that if you're a Black woman, you need to straighten your hair so you're less threatening, or you can't wear locks, or you can't, like all of these kind of things. We're trying to push people toward a certain ideal or a certain standard of what is best, what is most trustworthy, what is ideal, and to kind of distance ourselves from whatever else is seen as less than. And again, even though that's not, even for people who are atheistic, those are theologies. Those are theologies of just kind of like how, and understandings of how we came to be, how the world is, why it is the way it is, and what we need to strive for as a result of that. And that's the root of the brokenness, because then decisions are made off of that. Ideas and beliefs about who you are internalized from those interactions constantly, especially if it's day after day after day, whether you're thinking about it or not. These things are seeping into your worldview. And so, I don't know, that's just a weird opener, but I can at least see, Travis, where you think from there, and I have other thoughts that I can share later.
Yeah, for sure. Well, how does that, would you have both battled that thought then as a kid of almost, I guess, in a sense, being less than? I mean, the cookie dough example, did that affect you, or did you just know better and you brush it off and moved on?
Well, in my family, I grew up African, very much aware of my Nigerianness. And really my parents are very much like, doesn't matter if people are like rude or racist to you, just like get A's in school and then, you'll get a good job and it won't matter. I don't know,
Yeah.
And so, when that came at me, clearly I'm in my 30s now and I remember it. And I can't explicitly say like, that was the day I started feeling bad about myself, or that was the day that, I was like, I don't like Asian people, which is not true at all. I can't talk about how as a child I processed that, but it clearly for me is something that stuck with me and was a worldview that I had to then contend with in different ways repeatedly at different points in my life when other things would happen.
Yeah. That worldview, that feeling, that contending with that. I mean, for me, it doesn't take much for me to feel out of place. You know what I mean? Like if it's visiting a new church as a kid, or like, I don't know. I just feel like it never really takes that much for me to feel a little bit out of place. But dealing with that, if you're dealing with that, say, as a young kid, based on the color of your skin, that's a difficult thing to sort of deal with as a kid.
You don't typically have the tools unless you've been in a family. Some families are pretty deliberate from early on, but even then I feel like there's no formula for like, this is how you make sure that your kid is consistently reinforced at any point in time from racist attacks.
Right. Did you deal with that as a kid, Travis?
I would say no.
Okay.
Not directly of what Lulu experienced, because I would say that at that age, I wasn't around other races. I was only around Black people.
Oh, okay.
For the most part, and so I didn't experience that until probably I got into, I was in class with other races, like white people. And so forth, but I didn't really know them, right? I didn't until probably middle school or high school. And I would say I had one very close white friend, and because they were still very close. And I just recall, I think the closeness that you have with people, it shows up based on if you're spending time in these people's homes, right, or having meals and dinner together, right? And in high school, middle school and high school, there was only one white family that I would ever been to their house. Right. So just think about that for a minute. Right.
Yeah.
And so leading up to that, I wasn't thinking about race, because to me, it was us and them.
Yeah.
I don't really know them. So
yeah.
I mean, I'm not really thinking about it as a kid.
Yeah. Okay.
As a kid.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, my journey in high school, then go into college and education, and then my eyes were open more to the world, how big the world is, and a lot of different people in the world. When I was older, not so when I was younger, in terms of just thinking about it and talking about it.
Yep.
So I didn't experience that, but I did experience. I had a great friend who loved his family to this day, and we spent time together though, and so there was a mutual respect because we knew each other.
Right.
Right. And I think one of the things, answering your first question about what is broken in this country, one thing is there's ignorance around it, the true history of race in the United States or in America. And I'm sure Anthony probably talked about it at length last week.
Yeah,
with
and
you,
Brad too. Yeah,
and Brad,
yep.
and they can articulate better than I can. But there's a lot of history that white people don't really know.
Yeah, and don't care to know,
and don't care.
Frankly.
Maybe don't care to know. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's broken, and that gives well, I'm not thinking about it because it's not in my face.
Yes,
I don't have a desire to learn the real history of America and the impact, even to this day. And perhaps, maybe you can speak for it, but my biggest thing, I would like to see, spending more time getting to know people who don't look like you, like genuinely, right? And that happens at the dinner table, right?
Yeah.
Or in the backyard, when you're grilling and so forth. And I think our neighborhoods, even today, I live in Franklin, and what I see is, in general, just like around the rest of the country, different races congregate, and even in the Middle Tennessee area, you have high concentration of African Americans in a certain area, Hispanics in certain areas, and where white folks live as well in a certain area. And so there's still a divide in terms of where we live.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. One of the things that Anthony mentioned last week when he was here was that he's in this space, very much so. It's of high interest. He's extremely well read. We were talking about this before we hit record, Travis, but he texted me a list of books after. I mean, it was a lengthy list of books. I haven't even processed his text yet. But he went back to his high school reunion at some point, years and years later. And even at that reunion, it tended to be the black people sort of were congregating, the white people were sort of congregating. He was like, man, I think it wasn't like it was, I guess, obnoxious. He was just a little bit disappointed. All these years later, why aren't we commingling better? Another thing that he mentioned was that he's kind of he does have these conversations with his kids, that they need to be better. So to be basically, I don't know, how would you say, to get maybe to get the promotion, to have the same probability of getting a promotion from your likely white boss, you're going to actually have to be better just to be on equal footing. You know what I mean? And that's kind of one of the things he's talked to his kids about, is they're going to have to be just a little better. But that's a lot of pressure. Do you guys feel that pressure personally? You're going to have to talk. Do you have kids?
I do. Oh, yeah. She's going on 8 months right now. So we have.
You have an 8-month-old?
Yeah.
Whoa! Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
How old is your youngest?
About 6 months.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you guys feel that pressure personally, and are you talking to your kids like that? I'm curious.
Yes, personally. My oldest is 7, so no, we're not directly talking about the need to show up better than the next white person, or to just get the opportunity because they're too young at this point. But I do find myself being very focused on them excelling and doing the best they can whatever they're doing, with the mindset of at some point having that conversation, right? But right now it's not about America, what's true in America around opportunities and biases and so forth, but it's about them excelling and whenever they do. So,
and do you want them to excel because they can, because they should, because if they excel, maybe they can be in positions of influence or authority and help direct this country in a better way? Like what's behind the motive to excel? I'm curious.
I would say kind of all of the above. I mean, I want them they should, right? If we're going to do anything, you want to do it to the best of our ability, to honor the Lord, first, right? And so, whatever it is, and so that's my mindset. Yeah. And I think, at least in my home, in my upbringing, every generation, we want to do just a little bit better than the generation behind us, right? With education, economics, opportunity, things of that nature. And I think that's what I would strive for my kids as well.
How have you handled that pressure personally, of feeling like you needed to be a little better? That's a lot of pressure for whether you're a kid or an adult. You said you feel that pressure. I think how do you handle that?
Well, I think you have to handle it, right? Because I think there's no choice. I mean, for me, that's what's necessary, unfortunately, right? And so it's like, if I go left or go right, the right way is to handle the pressure, step up to it and deliver, because the other way is, not very good. It's poverty. Yeah. It's pain. It's broken families. It's in this country. Could be jail. It could be death.
Could be
right?
Violence against you.
Things of that nature. And so, yeah.
And do you mean by that, if you don't live, say, in a nice community or a nice development or the good part of town, or have a good job, or those types of things, that violence may happen against you? You might not be safe. Is that what you mean?
Not even that, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, so you
say. Yeah.
So talk through that.
Yeah, you want to go first?
I was going to say no. I mean, I think it's education really helps, one, with opportunity and having visibility to something different than poverty, right? Or just that, really. Okay. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind, because if you live in poverty, you're more likely to potentially go to jail, and more likely to have a family that's broken, and you don't have the opportunities, or you don't see the opportunities, have the visibility to other parts of the world, or what's going on, right? Yeah. Because you're kind of stuck in this box, if you will. Yeah. And the world we live in America, we look down on people. Yeah. In that box.
But I think it's also hard too, because at least based off of the conversation that you were alluding to before, that idea of having to be better in order to have access to the same opportunities. I think I know that's something that's been drilled into me ever since I was a child. And I know same thing with my husband. Jake, he's African American. He was, his family is from the United States, but that's something that we could both very much relate to. And I think what's hard about that, what comes to mind for me is the idea of being above reproach. Because I think, unfortunately, if you are, say for instance, if you are just as good or not somehow obviously better, and I use air quotes around that, then you have to make it, it's easier. Sometimes there's social networks that we don't have access to because of the history of the United States and the relationships that have been formed, the wealth that's been kind of made, but people have had access to in certain communities, typically white communities, that Black people don't have access to. So there's, even when you think about like maybe jobs and things like that, people tend to hire who they know, or maybe who they rely on references, and those networks could really count for you. And if you have someone who it's like, okay, well, this is my friend's son or daughter, but this person, you know, say they're like a Harvard grad, blah, 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 then it's like, you know, you put someone in a position where they're going to have to really argue if they can even be forced to be held accountable for whatever decision making. And it gets tricky because, again, if someone's running a business, at the end of the day, it's their prerogative. But I think this pushes up against this idea in the United States that it is a meritocratic society, and that if you do well, if you show yourself to be good, then the clear reward is, you know, getting what you deserve for the efforts that you expended. And that's not always the case, especially if you are a person of color. Typically, if you are Hispanic, if you are Black, if you're Native American, if you're those kind of things, and even in some Asian communities as well, because there's a whole other thing about race there. But as far as the violence, it's hard because, like, as you guys I'm sure have been hearing, whether it's Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery or just people, tons of people who, and these are only the ones who have gotten Twitter hashtags over the past year or even 5 years. Whenever anything happened, especially if we're thinking about clashes with police, then one of the things that quickly comes out is like, okay, well, what were they doing that was threatening, or what were they doing that was whatever? And you have to be like, okay, well, sometimes in order to gain sympathy, it's like this person, she was an EMT who was just coming home from a shift. I know it gets tricky because, like, again, her boyfriend was involved in trying to defend their home and things like that. Or I think there was a case a couple of years ago with a therapist who was trying to help a special needs patient of his, try to kind of coax him out, and the police fired on him. And it's just kind of like, what is, again, like, do I need to be a person where I can, like, I have a whole bunch of friends, white, Black, and otherwise, who can vouch for me that I was a quote unquote good person, so that we can make a case for why this act of force on the behalf of, let's say, police, again, since we're just sticking on this right now, was excessive and unnecessary, and sometimes triggered by the fact that because of the color of my skin and because of my gender, my husband has to contend with this. Travis has to probably contend with this way more than I do as a Black woman. But again, we still see terrible things happening, woman, man alike. But it's just, you have to be above reproach so that when things happen, you can just be like, no, it wasn't that they raised their voice. No, it wasn't that they didn't, you know, take orders from citizens who were telling them to stop jogging, or why they were, like, you have to make up all these things. And so I think that better than, it can apply absolutely to the way you perform in school so that you can get the job or whatever, or it can apply to, okay, how you need to be seen when people are writing your obituary because somebody reacted in a problematic way, and now there's all these representation kind of politics that are going on that have to do a large part of the time with because of the way that you look.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys hear this, but I have heard it a couple of times in the last couple of weeks. A surprising amount, to be honest with you, about sentiments like just weird things, like maybe the I mean, some of this stuff is just so embarrassing to even repeat, but like maybe the liberals paid someone to shoot that, you know, to shoot Ahmaud Arbery, you know, like maybe there's a political agenda here. And then nitpicking on like, well, how about, but this and that, and technically this and technically that, and blah, 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 blah. But here's like, so I was just in 10 minutes, literally, based on one news article, just jotting down a few. Like these are Black people that have died just in the last 4 years. That all of them, I would say all of them on this list. And I would certainly say 100% Ahmaud Arbery. You cannot convince me otherwise. If he was white, they're still alive.
Right.
Absolutely.
And to me, that's all I need to know to bring this into a discussion about ethnic unity and racial reconciliation and all these things. I don't care with some of these details. I mean, and some of the stuff and the police stuff is, you know, I mean, that's a discussion all of its own, but it's, I mean, some of the stuff you just can barely even watch. And the fact that, you know, I didn't know about Mr. Arbery until last week, until that video came out. Like that alone is absurd. Again, just the fact that because his skin was black, he wound up getting killed. That is, details aside, I mean, this is now the center part of the discussion. We have to fix this. We just can't keep going on like this, because we've been going on like this for some time now. But back to the pressure, though. My wife grew up Amish, like legit Amish. Yeah. Her parents are still Amish, like horse and buggy Amish, the whole nine. I grew up Mennonite, so it's similar, but we had cars and houses had electricity and stuff. So like Mennonites is kind of in between. So I got to like wear these clothes and stuff like that. But so I know a little bit what it feels like to have like maybe some expectations on you that is foreign to you, and feel like you need to perform a certain way based on expectations of other people. And with some of it, you don't personally think it makes sense, but you need to do it because that's what's expected. And for some personalities, it's a bigger deal than for others. What I mean by that is like my wife, no big deal. Like she'd be, I don't think she'd mind me saying this. She'd probably be Mennonite to this day, like if it wasn't for me. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, she's totally on board with the decisions we're making. Obviously, we're making them together. But she's kind of like, she's kind of cool with just doing what's expected of her. Person like me drives me nuts. Like if it's something I want to do, great. But if there's an expectation on me that I don't appreciate, that would drive me nuts. So I think that's why I'm coming back to this pressure. How do you handle that pressure? I'd love to hear from both of you. It feels like to me, I mean, you both said it. You both feel a expectation to be sort of better because your skin is black, but that's a pressure put on you from the outside. How do you handle that pressure? What do you do with it? Because that seems like a tough thing to carry around 24/7.
I think for me, haven't really thought about it a lot, right? Because I think it's just normal. It's what you live in every day, right? So I really haven't thought about how I handle it, right? I think it's always been there, right? And so it's not like I'm walking into something that was never there per se. What I think about is I don't know why it's this way, but I would like for us to go back to talking about what's broken, back to little children, right? If we just kind of turn our eyes back to when we were children, and I would say most of us, even I know my children today, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, they don't look at race. They don't look at the color of skin. They love each other because they're friends and they enjoy being around each other. And I think about my boys. I have 3 boys. And right now, I don't know if I told you this in the past, Kent, but right now, wherever we go, my kids are the cutest little thing ever, right? White women, Asian women, black women, they're just so cute, right? I am fearful that, in short 10 years, they will be a threat. Those
they
little boys, they're too tall, but 10 years ago, they were cute. They were the cutest thing. I want to take them home. I want to take them home with me. And it's just sad in this country that even now, my hope was that by now, my children wouldn't have to experience that, but they probably will. And I'm hopeful, right? I'm hopeful. But it is challenging to think that, and there's a burden there for me to protect them in that way. Because I don't want them to be, I'll tell you this, another way to handle pressure, I would say, for me, I'm very comfortable being the only black person in the room. Because I have, in certain settings, at work, business affiliations, maybe in a neighborhood, perhaps, sometimes at church. And so again, I'm very comfortable in that space. I will tell you, some black people are not, right? And same with, same probably with white people. If you put yourself in a minority situation, how would you feel? For me, I'm at a point where in most cases, I can make myself feel comfortable in it. Doesn't mean I feel like I'm at home going back to college.
Right.
But
yeah, okay. So you can make yourself feel you can make yourself comfortable, not necessarily at home. Do you feel like you have to become more white to be comfortable, or do you just find a way to be comfortable? You know what I mean? Do you feel like you're having to not be yourself to be comfortable?
I would say in certain settings, I've grown to not be my full self. Right? Yeah, I mean that's just the way it is, right? If I'm talking with my my Black close friends that I grew up with, I'm going to probably maybe talk a different way, perhaps, right? And it's just honestly, it's just a natural thing that happens. I would say, yeah, right. And I think, and also and depending on what setting I'm in, I can't be as transparent,
right,
in certain settings because I don't know. I mean, I know Kent, right? I can be fully transparent with you at any time because we know each other, right? We've shared things together, right? Yeah. Going back to what I was saying, what I think the country needs in terms of like we need to spend time together. Yeah. So we know each other.
Yeah. I fully agree with that. I actually think that's a very big point because growing up in upstate New York, there was not a big Black community there, honestly. I mean, there was not many, well, truthfully, there wasn't many people there in that community that just weren't white, period, of any ethnicity, really. I mean, it was, and so I didn't have many Black friends at all until moving to Nashville. And then, when you see something like what happened to Mr. Arbery, this is I'm having a very different reaction now than I would have, 7 years ago because of the friends that I now have, that have the same color skin as this guy that was shot, 1 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon from jogging. Lulu, you said you mentioned you feel that pressure. How do you handle that?
I think similarly to Travis, it's not something that I think about. And I know for me, it's just, I also have a personality that's a little bit of a perfectionist. And I think, so I don't know how to detach that from, again, what this greater pressure is. And then same thing with my family. Our kind of worldview is a little bit more communal than it is individualistic. And so that means that you need to get your stuff together because you don't want to make the family look bad, or you don't want to make what you do impacts other people. And so in that sense, there's a pressure that's from there, that's outside. And then the race is an external layer on top of that. And so when I think about that, I think that's just the way that I've always operated. And so in that sense, there's at one point, I think, an encountering of like, oh, okay, this is what, this is what the world expects of me. How am I just going to keep doing this? Am I going to buck against it? Because I can sometimes have a little bit of a random rebellious streak sometimes. I'm kind of exactly what you're saying. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, you understand.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, I'm just kind of like, okay, I am who I am, who has been someone, after always not fitting in these places, I've grown to be a person who is pretty comfortable being uncomfortable, or maybe not being the only, or being the one who doesn't fit in. Like that's become possibly my shtick. And so in that, it gives me freedom to be who I am, to be someone who is Black and who has natural hair and who likes video games and jujitsu and like anime and like all this stuff that people are like, wait, but how we wouldn't have put you. I'm like, yes, I do that. I do that. And I do it all. And that's who I am. And I'm going to leave you to try and figure out how all that fits together, because I'm busy existing, being all of whatever that weird possible in someone else's eyes combination is. Yeah. And I think that, like, I know, again, still early on, middle school at once, I was on like a school team to like show people around the school, like give tours when other people were thinking, mainly parents thinking about bringing their kids there. And I remember at the end of one of the tours, one of the women, she's like, oh my gosh, you were so articulate, and not so much in a way that was like, for a kid, but just for like, it was just a weird thing. She was just like really.
She didn't expect it.
Exactly. She was just kind of like, whoa. and it really was, I think, in parentheses after that, like for a Black person. And things like that have come up all the time consistently because kind of just getting to your point about sometimes people thinking like, okay, well, do you, or sometimes if there's conversations that come up, then people are like, well, you're not that kind of Black person, or you're more like us, you're more white, and it might be because of the way I talk or because of, I don't know, what other category I tend to fall into that people are like, oh, that's like me too. And I think what I've come to do is rather than associate anything with Black or white or Asian or Hispanic or whatever, it's just kind of like, as a person, this is like an affinity that I have, and you have that affinity too, and it's not yours and it's not mine.
Yeah.
It's this thing that we can enjoy, and it's not bounded by race or culture, thankfully enough, because this world is so interconnected now.
Yeah.
We can just appreciate those things and not be so obsessed about putting labels or boxes around those things. But I think in the same sense, on the other side, there still needs to be an understanding and appreciation of like, okay, if I'm loving Korean dramas, that comes from Korea. Like I need to make sure that like I can appreciate that that's an aspect of Korean culture that I can celebrate rather than, so we don't cross into the lines of appropriation and like all these and disrespectful kind of things. I think there's a way to acknowledge culture and race to an extent that comes as a result of, the culture that emerges from race without it being restrictive. And so I think for me, when it comes to this idea of like how to deal with that pressure, I think God is working on me and my perfectionism in the ways that goes bad in and of itself. But I think at least again, in that aspect of do whatever you do until the glory of the Lord, like that's something that I can embrace, and whatever comes along with that, appreciating the different influences that pour into me in that kind of way that God's given me exposure to.
Yeah. Yeah. How about within the church? Because I want to make sure we hit on that.
Yeah.
Again, this topic is so big. It's like, man, where do you even start? You know what I mean? So yeah, in thinking in terms of church, Travis, did you read, by the way, the whole book,
Inside
or Outsider by Brian Loritz?
I haven't finished it all.
Okay, but you are reading it?
I'm reading it,
I
yes.
got it based on your recommendation the other day, and I'm 20% through it, but very, very, very good so far. And this book just talks about Inside or Outsider, My Journey as a Stranger in White Evangelicalism, and My Hope for Us All by Brian Loritz. It's actually very good so far, and easy to read. The chapters are nice and short.
Easy.
It feels like you're making good progress. I like it. But it talks about this area of ethnic unity and so forth, diversity in a church setting. So let's talk about that for a second. You mentioned, just being this complex person, and I'm really glad you brought that up. Because I just want to say it like, please do that. Please be that, Do you feel that, okay, it's safe to say that the general public, the general population in America, there's definitely some preconceived notions and so forth that you got to battle against. And it's safe to say the general public does not necessarily want you to just be fully yourself. That's safe to say, right? I mean, because you're feeling like you've got to kind of be a certain way or be better than just to kind of, make it well in society, which is sad. How about though within the church? Like, do you feel deep down that there are white people out there that truly, honestly do just want you to let your hair down, so to speak, like just be yourself? Or do you even like deep down sort of question like whether there's any white people out there that want you to do that, or many at all?
I know for me, I don't think that whiteness is inherently oppressive. And so kind of like you were saying, Travis, like when you've built a relationship with someone and that person cares about you, that's evident in how they act towards you and in them wanting you to thrive and, be your full self as much as you can be. And even in sometimes like whether it's, I know in some spaces I'll just kind of like not go there, so to speak, with whatever, because I don't feel like explaining. But there even are some white friends with whom it's like, I feel free and safe to explain what I'm talking about with you. And I know that your questions are not from a place of critique or really like, is that really the case? It's more of like a genuine openness and wanting to know. And so I'm grateful that within the body of Christ, that's something that those relationships are things that I've found. But I think that like one kind of idea that might be helpful to kind of just for this conversation is this idea of just kind of different layers of racism to extent in like how it manifests. And there's prejudice, which is like kind of an interpersonal one of just how I relate with somebody that I'm talking to, or how they treat me, or how they think about me, whether it manifests fully into their behavior or not. And then there's systemic, which I think sometimes people think of as like a conspiracy of like maybe, let's just say like white people sitting around a table and being like, how can we stop, blah, blah, blah. And it's very cartoonish, and that's not what it looks like at all. Or sometimes people think of interpersonal racism, meaning like, well, if you're in the KKK, like then clearly you're a racist, but otherwise you're good. And so people are like, woo, can like, you know, wipe my brow and be happy, wipe my hands of that and know that I'm not part of the problem. But I think it's frustrating because there are even attitudes that seem like they might be benign that can sometimes go unchecked between people interpersonally when they're relating, whether it's attitudes about people who are not in the room, whether it's attitudes about people who are, that then affect the way that they make decisions. And then those decisions, especially if you are in positions of power, become part of a larger structure. It becomes part of policies that are in place or programs that are created or not created and those kind of things. And those things become structure. And so when people are railing against structure, they're like, well, what do you mean the structure is racist, blah, 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 blah. It's like the structure is based on viewpoints or opinions that, whether they think negatively about, you know, people who are, you know, not at the table, or whether they just completely are ignorant of what people are going through and then don't take those experiences into account. And then they create systems that maybe benefit them because they're like, I thought it was a good idea. But if you talk to so-and-so who's maybe living in poverty or maybe is being victimized by police or whatever, you would realize like, oh, wait, that's not this. Even though I might be well-intentioned, what I came up with doesn't help because it's not taking their views, their lived experience into account. And so when I think about the church, I just recently discovered, and it's been like blowing my mind in a very good, but I'm still trying to figure out what to do with it way. Dr. Vince Bantu wrote a book about kind of the history of the church. And like my friend and I have been talking for months, well, actually for years about this, but especially it came up again in the past couple of months because we've been grappling with this. Just we both love Christ. We're both trying to, we're striving as best as we can in our own strength and with the Spirit's help to know the Lord better, to grow in the Lord. But we can't help but ask the question, you know, it's just kind of like, all right, Christ, I don't know, it might be controversial, but I'm just going to say it anyway.
Please do.
I'm on this train.
Yeah, please do.
Christ, he's a Middle Eastern man. And he and his disciples and like our faith grew out of this place, out of this continent. Like, why is it that so far a lot of the things that we cite, a lot of the theology that we devour and kind of like that we venerate and appreciate, why is it coming out of Europe? Like, where are these Asian scholars? Where are these Eastern, African, Middle Eastern? Like, where are they? Because especially for people who have had these ties to Christianity, because it has flourished there. It hasn't been completely stamped out by whether it's other religions or politics that are happening in the area. Where are those voices? And I think that it's not to discredit or throw out everything that we've grown from and everything that we've learned and appreciated over time. But I think it draws to our attention the need to see how other brothers and sisters in the faith are growing and walking with the Lord as well. I think we can gain and appreciate that from one another. And I know sometimes there's very obvious and understandable linguistic barriers. It's like, I don't speak Aramaic, if anybody's even speaking that anymore. I don't speak Hebrew. Like, I'm not about to study that. Like, I'm done with school too. Like, I'm not doing any of that. But I know there are people out there who work to translate, and I know there are people out there who are willing to share. But if I'm not willing to even look, you know, for that, it's not going to easily come across my table, you know, in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I think that there's something to be said there, because I think that there's the way that I've grown up, I think I was African Methodist Episcopalian at one point growing up, that denomination. And then I was Pentecostal and I was Southern Baptist and then non-denominational.
wow.
Like I've just been in a whole bunch of different spaces.
Yeah.
I see worship and worship done differently, faith done differently. Some things in some places I'm like, I'm definitely not doing that.
Yeah.
And some approaches to things I get frustrated with. But the beauty of it is it teaches me that there's not one way to, like, other than Christ is the one way, but there's all these families of faith and ways of worship and ways of confessing who God is and celebrating that are present throughout the United States, across the world as well. And so I think sometimes I know that I get frustrated because I do make certain choices about, the places I go. It's like, okay, maybe like this isn't exactly my worship style. I can go home, or when I'm riding home from church, I can cut on what I'm more used to and appreciate, or something like that. Even though it's like, I can still say like, this is beautiful and I love it, but there's still something missing. And sometimes, which feels hard to ask for because I'm not talented. I cannot sing. I used to play piano, but I didn't practice. So I don't know how to do that anymore. Saxophone, all of that. And so I can't even, it's hard to say like, I want to worship this way, but I can't contribute. It's like, so I can't just be like, Kent, can you learn this and lead me? That's not fair. And so I have to kind of reconcile with that. But I think if there's spaces or times where that's brought up, the fact that there's even history of marginalization within the church that has affected Eastern Orthodox like Christians, which includes Africans and Asians and Middle Easterns, or wherever, geographically you want to talk about. And if people aren't willing to learn that or hear that, that becomes a problem. That becomes a thing of like, well, don't talk about that part. Like, it's a shutting down of yourself. That happens in the church. Or if you're like, man, I would really love this kind of worship, and someone takes it rather than like, oh, let's explore that, to just kind of like, oh no, that's an affront on what we're doing. That becomes like, okay, you can't, that's off the table. Don't go there. So it becomes a feeling of like, you can show up here as long as you do things the way we do and celebrate what we do, and the conversation ends there. I think as long as there's an openness to these other areas and these other experiences, because I know I'm not the only one who's bounced around to different denominations and different, again, being whether it's Mennonite and Amish and whatever, like people are like Quakers, like there's all these really cool things, ways in which, again, as long as we're fixing our eyes on Christ, that God still shows up, that we need to pay attention to. And so as long as I find myself in a church space that welcomes that, I feel okay, but there's still some things that it's like, there's no perfect place, at this point in time, but we need to look more like heaven.
We do. Yeah. And there's no perfect place. However, it would be fair if we all felt like something was missing at least the same amount of time. And I fear that's not the case. You know what I mean? Because in white kind of evangelical circles, a lot could be said, but the one thing that I think would be tough to argue against is that we tend to demonize that which we're uncomfortable with.
For sure.
I mean, this just happens over and over and over again. Maybe that's a preaching style. Maybe that's a music genre. I mean, it's just, we just do. Maybe it's the ethnicity of someone that's saying something and it makes us a little uncomfortable. I mean, that happens way too often. You mentioned something about, how did you put it? Maybe like there was something that's missing, or maybe there's a gap or hole there in terms of the music style I think you were referring to.
That's an example.
I want to ask you guys about that. So like, again, in a church setting, in an evangelical, Christian evangelical setting, what are some of those things that are missing that we might not be aware of? By we, I mean a white evangelical American might not be aware of. Like even, no wrong answer here. Like super practical is great. The music thing, I'd love to hear more about that. That sounds like that's one of them. Is there others?
Yeah, I guess.
And by the way, Travis, there's no way it's 5'10". There's no way you can leave in 20 minutes. Come on, reschedule your meeting.
Hey, gotta go.
I have Buffalo Trace bourbon over there.
Oh, okay.
I thought that might keep you.
4 Roses.
No, well, I can go get 4 roses if that's what it takes. I didn't know you're that picky, man. Come on.
Just give you a hard time. But what I will start with is I'm hopeful, and I know that only the power of Christ within us and within the church that's gonna move us to the place where there's no racial injustice, bias, even within the church, and to the point where we are able to experience what heaven will look like at church, right? I'm hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
We're nowhere near that, in my opinion, today in America, for a lot of reasons. Honestly, I think there's and I'm speaking of the total church right now in America. That's what I'm speaking about. That I think you're exactly right. I think minorities in the church are very uncomfortable in certain cases, and I think one thing is, hey, we need more people to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the challenges I think we have. And it's and we're talking about inside the church, but I think it's outside the church as well. So it's kind of like, man, does the church look any different than outside the church,
right? As
relates to those things.
Yeah. Do the people attending the church, is it a representation of the city or the area? Is that kind of what you're referencing?
Yes, but also the bias as well that goes on, right? Outside the church, Monday through Friday or Monday through Saturday. I think some can experience that inside the church as well.
Oh, I see. Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but yes, I mean, if we want to talk numbers, right? Obviously, yeah, right. I mean, if like Nashville, I don't know, Nashville might be 10%, I don't know, 10, 15% Black, right? And probably 6 to 8% Hispanic or something like that. Yeah. Should the churches in that area reflect that? I think so. If you're pursuing kind of, all nations and all tongues.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so forth, right? But so that's one thing. Being uncomfortable with, like we like what we like, right? We like, why do you think people, if you put people that look totally different in one big room, your big room out here, we have like a gathering of some sort, Black, white, Asians, why do we just gravitate to the people that look like us, right?
Yeah.
We do that in the church as well because that's comfortable. It's comfortable for us to, we want to be around people that look like us, talk like us. We want to have that sense of home, sense of safety, if you will. And so there's a lot of preferences that comes with that, right? And inside the church, yes, music is one. Music for Black people, music is probably one of the top on the list.
I was going to ask, do you think that's the top on the list?
I think it's very close.
Very
At
high.
least for the friends that I've spoken with.
Oh, yeah?
Very high.
Okay.
Because it comes back to how you were raised and the experiences you had as a child and your family, right?
And also too, sometimes I love hymns because of again the messages that are conveyed, the words that you're saying, and sometimes when it comes to whether it's like gospel or spirituals or things like that, there's stories, there's communications, there's a connection with God that's expressed in ways that are completely different from maybe traditional hymns or even contemporary worship songs that's being missed. And I think there's a way that resonates. I know with me personally, in a way that, I still connect with these things, but I think when there's that absence, that absolutely feels missed. It's an aspect of our Christian experience, collective Christian experience, that's cut out, and that feels like a loss.
Okay, so just to have just a little bit of straight talk, and just please forgive my ignorance, but like what types of music would tend to be more white evangelical that may not resonate as well? in the Black community, and what types of music would, if you showed up to a church and you're visiting and they're playing this particular type of music, that you'd be like, oh, cool.
It's hard because it's kind of, as Travis was saying before, like the Black community is so nuanced. I think it'd be hard to make a call, but I know for me
About for
personally,
you guys even.
yeah. It would be, I feel bad. It's like, I feel like I'm about to name names.
I mean, that's okay.
Like,
you mean bands?
I appreciate Chris Tomlin, but I feel like sometimes, like, if I'm in a space, I'm just kind of like, okay, well, some things are, they're just straight psalms that are put to music in a different way, and I can appreciate that. But like sometimes that style, I'm just kind of like, meh. Like,
yeah,
I know that I appreciate it because I love the Lord. And there's some songs too that he does put out that I'm like, okay, I do enjoy that. I appreciated that style.
You can say that. I mean, that's totally you and me both, by the way.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah.
Right. And I know, like, just again, that's different from maybe, like, I'm even thinking just like in whatever playlist that I have of just, again, whether it's gospel music, whether it's spirituals, sometimes that go to, I think they call them like Negro spirituals from back to times of slavery, where people were contending with and pushing against even just like fake versions of scripture, which was the slave Bible, carving out pieces to kind of to justify slavery, that then people were still relating and communing with the Lord in ways that were pushing against what they knew to be fake scripture, which is amazing. I think that, again, when we are singing songs like that, and for me personally, if it harkens back to that, that just takes me to, it helps me relate with my brothers and sisters in Christ. Again, in a time, in a place, in a situation where their eyes were fixed on the Lord. And that's just valuable to me. And, as much as I love a good beat, in different times, but at the same time, just again, with me being a person who's sometimes would be called out of the box, like I love King's Kaleidoscope. My husband, I love him. He does not like their music because he's like, I don't like the lead singer's voice. But with me, even still, like what the arrangements that Chad makes with like the songs and taking even like old hymnals, and I love brass and strings because I used to be in a jazz band. So like that even like resonates with me in a different kind of way. That's really cool. And so I think that there's aspects of just like speaking to experience that's valuable, the different types of instruments and the interplay between those, that are like the different beats and tempos and styles, that all these different ways are just really cool and fun ways to be like, man, listen how we're celebrating God with the triangle and the, harmonica and the saxophone and the piano and it's just kind of, or even just a cappella, gorgeous a cappella. And even just things that like just reverberate in your chest, that move you to emotion in ways that I know that worship is not about that experience, and taking you to that place necessarily. But I think it is really cool when because the Lord does still allow for that sometimes.
Yes.
And blesses us with that. And so I just love to be able to indulge in all of these different things, like just a buffet of worship.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, and by the way, Chris Tomlin is awesome. I mean, he's super talented, and so many people love his music. And I'm sure that even lots of people have come to know the Lord through his music.
Right.
That doesn't mean we need to like his music.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Or it need to be the only thing or the most heavily played. Like some things are overplayed, I think is the point.
Well, that's
that
a good point. Yeah. Well, that's a great point. I really have never listened to the radio, but part of the reason would be because of what you just said.
One thing I will say about Chris Tomlin, though, the first time I visited or became a part of a predominantly white church, Chris Tomlin's music was probably the only music that I kind of gravitated to.
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
Kind of the bridge, if you will.
Okay.
From
what was the other type of music that was being played that was less, that resonated even less? I mean, you don't have to name names. I'm just kind of curious.
It just wasn't my taste. It was totally different, right? I mean, if there wasn't a lot of room for me in my opinion, to make a joyful noise unto the Lord.
Okay. Yeah.
It was a bit slow.
Okay, got it.
It was, very reflective, if you will. Like for me, I grew up in a Black Baptist family, and so have you ever been to a Black Baptist church before?
No, I have not.
Okay. So when you visit a Black Baptist church, you will know, first off, you're going to be able to hear the music from the parking lot because it's loud.
Okay.
And everyone, it's very expressive, and we just like, how it makes you feel. We're worshiping the Lord, and we're kind of able to drown out everything else that's happening in the world, right? Or even in the room. And so there's a level of worship that I experienced as a kid, right? That I want to get back to, right? And you talked about having to feel uncomfortable or holding back. I know for a fact that a lot of Black people in predominantly white churches hold back in their worship, because based on wanting to not feel different,
Yeah.
And so forth. I know I have, right?
Yeah.
I know I have.
Yeah.
But maybe it'll change. Maybe I'm hopeful it'll change.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Hopefully. Certainly. What other things? One of the things that he talks about just early on in the book, because I've already kind of read some of it and haven't gotten super far here yet, but he talks about preaching styles and how his dad, Brian Lewis's dad, was a preacher, and Brian's a preacher, and he remembers his dad sort of preaching one way to a more Black congregation, and then toning it down and preaching a different way to a more, if he was visiting a church or whatever, more white congregation. Why are you smiling? Is that
it's so true. It's so true.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so true, right? I think, my current pastors, I love all the pastors of our church, Immanuel, and different styles. And I've been there 4 years. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be there many, many years. And so, but yeah, it's different. It's different, right? It's more Black pastors tend to be more expressive and more have more energy
and
right?
different cadence.
Okay.
Less of lecture or experience lecturing, but
no, I get it.
You know what I mean? And so, and you also have like a kind of a call and response, like, hey, I'm saying something that's true about our God.
You expect a response.
You expect some people to say amen. Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm with you.
Yes.
This guy is up there preaching. We're in it with him.
Yeah.
We're not just here to consume.
Right.
We're here to worship with them.
Yes.
So yeah, it's definitely, I totally agree. Totally agree with what Brian's saying in there. Other things I'll say that's different. I think from a multi-ethnic church standpoint, right? First, you have to have. I think this is my opinion, right? You have to have minority pastors on staff with authority, right? And they're able to have influence. Also on staff, eldership, all of that. I think that's important because if a new minority couple comes to the church, most of them are probably looking around to see if there are others in the room or if they're the only minorities in the room, right?
Absolutely.
And so if you don't have that, it's a barrier, it's a challenge. I think it can be a challenge.
And I think it gets back to that structural piece that I was talking about. It's just like, it's one thing if the congregation itself is diverse, but if the people in charge and making decisions are not, especially, it's one thing, if the leadership constantly does ask, the congregation, it's like, how can we proceed on that? But it's helpful to have, since we're talking about race and ethnicity, people of color in positions of power who can, at least for some aspects, speak to at least a segment of that experience, and then also be able to, that people may gravitate towards them in different ways. It's just because, again, the reality is that people do sometimes, make snap judgments just based off of the color of skin, but things might be told to some pastors differently, even, just because of the way that they look, the color of their skin. And so those things still need to be taken into consideration when there's an awareness of maybe issues that might be happening at the church or things that might need to be in place. If those things are not communicated, if people don't feel like they can approach leadership in that way for whatever reasons, then there's no way for the church to address it. And then they're scrambling still here, like, why is our a congregation not multi-ethnic? Why are people leaving? Why are people feeling frustrated? Or, so-and-so felt like they came and talked to me and I thought I did a good job and this person walked away feeling misunderstood still.
Yes.
And so that leadership piece is really important.
Absolutely. And there has to be a culture of honesty.
Yeah.
Within the membership base, right? Where you can just be honest. We're not trying to, we're all in this together, right?
Yes.
We're showing up, right? Together. And so let's be honest. And let's all get uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I would encourage all my white brothers and sisters to find a way to experience being a minority.
Mm-hmm.
Either professionally, through service, perhaps seek out a gospel-centered church that, a Hispanic church or a Black church, and just walk in that space to kind of just step into that, right? We had my kids go to a ethnic economic and diverse school. And one of the things that our head of school did at our parents meeting early in the year was we have a large number of Hispanic families. In the meeting, he stood up and said, "Hey, I'm going to be talking up here about our vision for the year and beyond and talk about a lot of things. But I need 6 volunteers to listen to this in Spanish. We have headphones and everything. We have a translator. And that exercise of wanting us to be put in a minority situation where I don't speak Spanish, but I'm listening to it.
You were listening to the translator?
The translator in Spanish through, and so just that whole thought of entering into the space of, feeling uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah.
I think all of us need to experience that at some point.
Yeah,
Right.
I agree. That's a great point. Any other, I'm sure there are, but other things that come to mind that white people might be oblivious to that you would miss or want at church, like even practical things. It might even be embarrassing to mention, but does anything else come to mind?
One thing that I think I'm grateful for our church, what we do well, what I used to love as a kid and growing up about, especially at our AMA church, was afterwards the church potlucks. And then also too, when you show up, if you're new, you're going to get called out for being new and you're going to...
Do you like that?
I hated it at the time.
Okay.
But there's something really sweet where it's just kind of like, we got,
Yeah,
it's
right.
stand
No,
up,
I get
say
that.
your name, and then the whole church, it's like a receiving line. I know it, sometimes I would feel like, oh man, but I would also feel like, wow, these people cared enough to stop their service to come over and greet me and welcome me into this church and tell me how glad they are to see me. And, hope that I'm blessed. And I know that the churches I was going to that were significantly smaller than our church right now. And so I don't think that would be feasible. And especially, of course, in the middle of coronavirus stuff, that's not feasible at all right now. But I think that even though the way we do, and this is not like a plug for Immanuel, but the way that we do community and that kind of welcoming and fellowship at Immanuel is different. I feel like it harkens back to that in a way that's, for me, heartwarming and welcoming. And I'm grateful for that because a lot of churches, the church we went to before this, it was a huge church. We could go in and out. We were there for 5 years. Some people we didn't even know some people. And we kind of like that. We're like, okay, we know our parking space, get in, get out. We know that we'll be at lunch in an hour, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And, in Immanuel, we're just kind of like, oh, hey, oh, crap. Okay.
Yeah,
hi,
exactly. Yeah.
But that family feel was just so wonderful. And I don't think that at least a lot of churches that I go to, that's something that feels very unique about Immanuel that for me harkens back to my experiences in Black churches that I really appreciated. And so I'm grateful for that. But I would hope that that is something that other people can experience in their church communities as well.
Yeah, interesting. The community aspect and kind of that brotherhood and sisterhood. Yeah.
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 Potlucks maybe.
Okay, well, I was just gonna ask on that. We used to have we called them I think fellowship dinners. I think something like that. But yeah, after church, you go into the church basement, and everyone had brought some food, and you would have lunch together. I think we did it I can't remember. It was more than a few times a year.
I would agree.
Is that more popular at Black churches? Is that something that okay?
Absolutely. After church fellowship, they even made they called this a fellowship hall.
Yes.
It's like they built on either the basement or an extension of the building. You just that's what you did after church. I think additionally, in within the service, being close together, be it we're praying together, we're all coming down front together, and we're praying to the Lord together. Just kind of, that's just kind of closeness that you feel at church, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what else.
I feel like those are the big ones, at least for me.
Okay. How about service length?
Oh, that's very
hour
different.
and a half. Is that common, or
maybe on the books? But I think at least in the churches I went to, again, especially
longer or shorter.
Longer.
Okay.
If a pastor was on a roll, especially, or if there was a special event, I think part of that call and response, sometimes people would be like, "Take your time, pastor," and you're like, "No, don't take your time," which is terrible. Again, I was a restless little kid in church back in the days, but I think there's something cool too to be said that. Where it's just kind of like, okay, we're here to worship the Lord. Like, this is what this day is dedicated for. Yeah. You're going to get fed. And so, but I know, again, my husband would completely disagree, possibly just based off of the experiences that he's had, because not everyone's experiences are positive. And so I think we, in the United States, and I don't know, again, this might be controversial, and it might have to do with just kind of like time, for me, African time, CB time, whatever. Some people tend to they're like, we expect for this to start on this time and to be out by this time. And sometimes, at least in the experiences that I had when I was part specifically, again, at this AME church and Pentecostal, it's just kind of like, okay, well, yeah, it's like a rough estimate, but we're not so obsessed with we have to be on this schedule or be out by this, or the parking lot needs to be cleared by this time. It's just kind of like we're fellowship and we're hanging out with our family, and when it's over, it's over. And two, if you need to go, just go.
Yes,
there's a level of kind of freedom in worship of hey, we're not gonna. This is the Lord's day, and we're gonna just not gonna rush through it,
right?
Yeah, right. In the Black church, and as long as we need to get through this, we're gonna do it and worship the Lord. Yeah. And I think also, but within that though, there's still a level of structure though, right, and formalities, which I think are important. I think there is and it depends on the church, right? You're talking. It depends on the church size, right? The type of church. Yep. There's some churches who are super casual. There's some things that irk me about certain churches, but it came from when I was black, from my black church, right? Yep. And it's just different. Yep. You try to be there on time, and there's kind of order to that, but it doesn't matter what time we leave. Yeah. Per se.
What do you think as far as the kind of, I guess you could say, almost like a little bit more abandon in worship and then more responsiveness in the sermon? That really resonates with me. I 100% agree. That's not the background that I grew up in, but there's value there, and quite frankly, it's my preference. You know what I mean? Even more than we have now at Immanuel, which I think it's great. But and I don't want to speak on behalf of the pastors, but I know they would agree here. So what could be done to work towards that end?
Which one are you asking?
Well, either one, I guess. More abandoned in worship, or do you think that's a personal preference thing? I guess that's where I'm going here. Is that just a personal preference thing, or is there really, you think, an outsized number of Black attendees at Immanuel that are really holding back because they feel like they should, based on all the white people there?
I mean, I can't speak for everyone, right? I can only speak for myself as related to this. I would say yes. I would say so, right? I think having more diverse music for worship is a good thing. And again, I think it goes back to us being uncomfortable. And I guarantee, I've spoken to a lot of, even it's interesting when the whole Kanye West church service, or what do they call it, Sunday music or whatever, Sunday service music. A lot of my white friends are like, oh, I wish we could do this at church. We could sing these type of songs at church. And I was like, oh, wow, really? Okay. And so you think about the choir.
Well, you didn't think that they would want to?
No, because we don't.
Right.
I don't experience that.
Right.
I haven't seen it.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Our church or other churches, per se. But when they're at home, they're bumping it. They're
Don't
bumping
you think
that
that's
music.
super common though? I feel like that's super common. That does not surprise me at all that you had a white friend that said that. I mean, does that surprise you, Lincoln? No, we listen to. We won't talk about what we listen to.
Yeah. I think one suggestion that a friend made that I thought was phenomenal, but it's not. I don't know whether or not it can be implemented. I guess is up to the people making decisions. But even if there was kind of like a cycling of the different styles of music, if like you were saying, if you were looking for abandon worship, what if we had a point in time where it's just kind of like, okay, today we are listening to something, that, or someone's leading us in worship that's more in the style of whether it's like Shai Linne or Jackie Hill Perry or, or Kirk Franklin or whatever, like along those lines. And then, even if it would be really cool if there were, I don't know how large the Hispanic body is at Immanuel, but like still just someone in leadership who is just kind of like, this is a Hispanic worship song, and rotating through. Cause I know even one Sunday it was maybe for the 500th years anniversary of like the Reformation or whatever, like they brought in a band and I was like, I like went up there. I was like, do you guys go here? Why aren't you up here every Sunday?
Yes.
And they're like, no, we don't go here. But I was like, that's cool. If you can bring in other artists, we're in Nashville. Like there's absolutely a plethora of people, of musicians, Christian or not, who could come and whether it's like we're able to like pay them or whatever service exchange or something, even if there was like money or funds that we raised as a church towards that, to just kind of have people come in and show us, help us, like expose us to other ways of worshiping the Lord. And even if it's just a musician playing it, my friend was telling me at her church, they would do that. And that became a ministry because they would have people who were non-Christians who came and performed. And it was a really cool deal one Sunday when, one of the guitarists or the bassist, he had accepted Christ just by virtue of having been there a couple different times and like leading them in these areas. And it's just like, that's such a wonderful opportunity that kills so many birds with one stone, and then it also takes off the responsibility of like, okay, Travis, like who can sing this for us or like who can lead us? And it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't, or, or even if it's someone who can in the church, they might not have the bandwidth or the time or whatever.
Yeah.
So we could tap into that resource here in our city, and that could be something to implement and something that if we as a church, and if there are more people who are just kind of like, oh, I love this music, and you're like, wait, I didn't know, and the only reason we're having this conversation is because it's playing before service right now.
Right.
That's a way to just open up. And it's like, okay, well, if we need to have, again, part of funds raised or something as a special thing for that, then we could work towards that, and that could be a way to achieve that goal. And then as far as the abandon and worship, then you could be trying to like just expose people. It'd be cool if, I'm sure for me, if my daughter started singing in Spanish one day as a worship song because of what she'd been hearing at church, that would be such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
That looks so much more like heaven than me just, again, like, even though I love the songs that I love, but I think that exposure is possible. It's definitely going to take some work. It's going to take some resources.
Yes.
And it will make people uncomfortable because people are like, I don't speak Spanish. I definitely don't speak Spanish.
Yeah.
But I could try and like learn or fumble over the words, or if I hear it enough, singing is a great way to learn another language.
Yeah.
Or expose to other cultures. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, you mentioned Shai Linne. We've talked about him before on the podcast. And for whatever reason, I only recently stumbled across his music, and I just love it so much. I think we need, so he's been at Immanuel apparently years ago. Were you there when he was there?
No, we missed that weekend, but we were at the church when he came. So
okay. Yeah. I mean, I think he needs to come back at some point again.
Yeah.
His stuff is phenomenal. Shai Linne, Shaillinne. I think Shai Linne.
It'd be hard to sing along though too, because sometimes his, like,
for
his
sure.
flow
Yeah.
is amazing.
Yeah. It would be, but I mean, it's exceptional, honestly.
Yes.
We were running out of time, but if you were to, it's okay to change the subject entirely here, but I'd kind of love to hear from each of you. Like, again, this is a big topic, but what is like maybe one more thing you guys wanted to say, or an issue maybe we didn't get to, or even like a corner here or a niche here or an issue here that is like specifically kind of close to your heart? Does anything come to mind?
I know for me, one thing that I think frustrates me about the way that Christianity is practiced, at least in the spaces that I've been in, the current division that we have, is that there's a division between, again, our souls and personal salvation and Christ, being the way for that and Christ alone, and then people focusing on justice. And I think that we should be consistently intentional about making sure that we recognize that, when Christ said, the most important commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. That's a combination of, and the way that I heard it put that I love so much is orthodoxy. So that's right, ortho being right and straight, correct belief, and then orthopraxy, and right practice, and why justice matters, and why these kind of things that people are just like, well, they're marginal issues or they're a distraction from the gospel. It's like, no, the gospel is a combination of orthodoxy and orthopraxis, as said by Christ himself. And it's consistent throughout Scripture, Old Testament to New Testament. And so that's one thing that really bothers me so much, that makes it hard to have conversations with sometimes a lot of white evangelicals and even Black evangelicals, because whether it's like not evangelicals, Black people who might be more in the social justice camp, because then there's still, again, it's an either or, that people have created this dichotomy and they feel safe in it. But really what we should be aiming for, what we should be pursuing, is a combination of the two that would make us probably hated on both sides of the aisles politically, in whatever circles that we are too socially. People would be like, I can't believe, I thought you said that you cared about this. How could you possibly believe that? I think that being in that uncomfortable middle space, that should be our experiences as followers of Christ, because that's also where he lived constantly.
Yes.
People just being like, wait, I thought you were on our side, or I thought you said that you believed this. How could you, blah, blah, blah. We just need to get comfortable being in that space. And I know that that's true for me too. I struggle with that. I care too much sometimes what people think or how they might feel. I try to need to adjust that in a healthy way, but that's something that's, I think right now, that the Lord has been pressing on my heart.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I have a developing hypothesis here that I think I'll just throw out there now, but again, it's still in the works. But it's like, if you're not being attacked by both the right wing and the left wing, then it's good. It should give pause to rethink your theology, Christology, your Christianity, basically, because that is starting to pop up very often. Like I'm in a conversation, they're saying but here's what I think about this, and that probably doesn't sound right because you would probably have thought I have a different view on it or whatnot. That's becoming increasingly common, and I think it's fantastic. How about you, Travis?
I guess what I would leave us with is one day soon, someone's going to tell my sons and daughter that they're different. And I'm not looking forward to the day when they come home and tell me that they had this conversation with someone. But I feel like I have to prepare for it, right? And I guess what I would like to leave, I want my white brothers and sisters to know that that day's coming. The ones that and how do you help me, help my family kind of navigate that, right? Because similar to Lulu, her memory as a child. Someone told her, right? Yeah. That she's different. But I want them to know that they're created in the image of the Lord.
Yes.
And that's what I want them to remember.
Absolutely. And how could your white brothers and sisters, I know you got to go, but how could your white brothers and sisters help with that? Be aware, first of all, know that that's a conversation that you fully expect to have one day. Some people may not be aware of that. Be aware, show support. How could your white brothers and sisters help your family with that?
First, I think it starts in their home, right? How training their children in the space of all of us were created in the image of the Lord. Yes, our skin colors are different, but we are one in the Lord. We have, we all bleed the same. There's a song, bleed the same, I think, by Mendisa and Toby Mac or something.
Mm-hmm.
Our blood is red.
Yeah.
All of us. And so training the kids up in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, and I would say one of the things I continued to say earlier was around, welcome minorities into your space, into your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like really,
Yeah.
Get uncomfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
Get uncomfortable with it, in such a way so when those conversations we have somewhere to go and kind of,
Mm-hmm.
and say, hey man, well, you know what, I'm dealing with this situation right now.
Yeah.
And pray for me. Encourage me in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to maybe not fully prevent, but to perhaps to slow down with the bitterness that could come up amongst whites, right?
Yes.
And I think that's what help looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. How do you think, so very soon after the Ahmaud Arbery was released, Lincoln, who's about to be 10, Jackson, who's about to be 8, I came home from work and then I brought them back here to the office and we stopped and got Chick-fil-A on the way back here. I wanted it to be like I wanted to go out of the way and make it a thing. You know what I mean? Like we're going to have a meeting, but we got Chick-fil-A and I set them at the table and they were eating their Chick-fil-A and we had like a 1-hour meeting on what happened with Mr. Arbery. I drew it on the whiteboard, just some generals. I kept it very general, but let them know that in my personal opinion, this guy would still be alive if his skin had been white. And if people disagree with me, that's fine because we can look at many, 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 many other examples of how things would have been different if their skin had been white. And so we had a conversation about they're white, they're boys, they're going to grow up, they have some responsibility here. That night, Jackson, who's about to be 8, he had a nightmare, but I don't feel too badly about that. Again, I kept it fairly general. And the reason I don't feel too badly about that, because I can promise you, he's not the only boy that had a nightmare.
Absolutely.
Based on knowledge of that transaction or that murder. And so I'm not trying to scar them. Certainly. I'm not trying to scare them even. I'm going to kind of taking the approach like I would with sex, I guess, is instead of one big talk, we're going to open the conversation and we're going to have plenty of talks, Is that something that you would maybe think is maybe not a horrible idea, or maybe that's a good idea that other people can be doing with their kids whenever they think it's appropriate? Maybe it's not 8 and 10, maybe it's later on. Is something like that helpful?
I think it's completely helpful and it's consistent with Scripture. If I think about Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens. Like you said, there are tons of boys, I'm sure, children who, and especially Black boys maybe, who also maybe had nightmares or were freaked out. Mothers
100%.
who had nightmares, fathers, sisters, people thinking about their loved ones just completely freaked out. And it's been the case since back and back and back, right? So in that sense, by you kind of entering in that sense to that experience, even though it was not intentional, not saying to give your children nightmares, of course, but to say, hey, the way that we will sit down and talk with our families and our children to just be like, this is what has happened in the world. Here's why it's wrong. Here's what we can do. Here's how to process it. That's, for someone who called themselves a brother or sister in faith, that's, I think, consistent with what Scripture calls y'all to do. And I know for me, it makes me feel loved and seen and appreciated, and kind of hopefully then puts your sons in a position too, if as part of your teaching as well, as like, if they hear someone saying something crazy, just being like, wait, that's not true, rather than it going unchecked, or being, letting the laugh get in there because that's more important. And then these things kind of grow rather than be called out for the lies that they are, or called out for the problems that they are. And so those kind of conversations, I would say, absolutely are the right type of thing to do. And I'm grateful for people like you guys who are doing that.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree with you more. And that doesn't happen if my white brothers and sisters as parents are not training their children in that.
Right.
That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. So
Yeah, and I think it doesn't happen often because we don't have friends that close friends that are of different skin color than I. Because when this goes down, like I'm thinking of just a list of guys that I know now that I can't imagine if they'd get shot when they're out jogging.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be awful. So anything else you guys wanted to touch on in closing?
I feel like
no. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you guys both for being on here.
Yeah, I
Love you
appreciate
guys. You're beautiful, godly. I mean, it's a privilege to be part of the church body with you guys.
So, thank you.
And so thank you very much for your time, Travis. We kept you late. Sorry that I'm not very sorry.
4 roses.
Next time. All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.